This is Gene Monterostelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 378, originally aired August 14, 2019. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we're going to have a conversation on how we can measure progress when we're tapping and in the transformation process, and how we can use that to ensure that we keep making good choices, and how we can use that as a motivation. Before we do that, just a quick reminder that the Tapping Q&A podcast is supported by listeners just like you. And as a part of that support, every single month we take 10% of the contributions, we put them on Kiva, and we loan them to small business owners all over the world. So as you support the podcast, you're also supporting people in some of the more rural and more developing parts of the world so that they can make a better life for themselves. This month, all of the supporters supported Lyda. Lyda is someone who actually has a business degree, has been continuing to grow her own business to support her family. And when I say support her family, it's not only her children, but also her parents. As part of a diversification effort, she is now adding some alfalfa fields and some guinea pig farms so that she can support her family in a way that is more sustainable. So thank you to all of the supporters of the podcast. If you too would like to support the podcast, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. Not only do you feel good knowing that you're supporting the show, you're also going to receive some amazing bonuses like custom tapping scripts, bonus podcasts every single month, and maybe even a little extra time with me. tappingqa.com/support. The conversation today is with my friend Mary Ayres, and Mary is one of the most thoughtful, deliberate tapping practitioners I know. And I think that's part of the reason why her and I really gel, other than the fact she's an absolute delight. But our approach to tapping is similar because it's very, very systematic. And Mary and I were having a conversation about something completely unrelated. And she shared with me 3 things that she likes to check in with in the transformation process to help us to understand how transformation is happening and to encourage us. And as she said it, and we were in the context of something that we couldn't have the conversation in the moment, I'm like, hey, let's stick a pin in that. I want to get you on the phone. I want to record an interview about this because it is so useful. And the reason why it's so useful is with some types of transformation, it's easy to measure. I can tell you that after 2 years of working out regularly, I can lift significantly more weight. I can do more push-ups. I can run longer on the treadmill. I can run faster on the treadmill. And so there's some really obvious markers of transformation. But with lots of transformation, it's about disposition and resistance, and how does emotion show up, and how strong does that emotion show up? And in a vacuum, it can be really difficult to tell if progress is happening. You know, a week and a half ago, I got angry at someone, and today I got angry at someone. Well, I'm still getting angry, so I wonder if the tapping is actually working. And so we need to have some lenses to look through to see and evaluate the tapping progress. And if we're able to evaluate the progress, there are a number of consequences that come from that. First is, when I'm having progress, I am encouraged and I'm going to keep after it. The second is, the only way we can evaluate something is if we have measurements to look at. And so it's difficult to tell from, like in the anger circumstance, from 1 week to the next or 1 month to the next, if things are getting better, if I don't have something to measure up against it. And so in this conversation, Mary shares 3 really simple ways away from just a SUD scale in the moment, but over a longer period of time of what transformation can look like and how we can measure it. And so this is something that if you want to be in a circumstance where you're seeing the value of tapping, you're using it to reduce emotional responses or to eliminate those self-sabotaging behaviors, this is really valuable because sometimes eliminating self-sabotaging behaviors is turning them down and doing them less often. And this is a great way to see that you're actually making progress. So here is my conversation with Mary Ayres. You and I were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and you were talking about your approach with clients and trying to figure out how we evaluate change and how we evaluate if things are working or not, and how we evaluate just things in the moment to figure out what we need to be working on. And so you'd broken down into 3 things. What were those 3 things?
So what we talked about is being able to measure by duration, intensity, and frequency. And I'll give you a little background with this, because it really is. It's not just a gimmick. It's not a fun thing to do with people. It actually comes out of what my training was, which was in solution-focused therapy.
Okay, yeah.
And part of that is one of the things that you do is you scale and you help people see small changes. So you and I both know how people get very all or nothing thinking, right? It's
Absolutely.
It's like, it's never working. It's always working. I want it to never work again. And so this came out of, that framework from solution focus and the opportunity to be able to give people a tool of which they can then think of what they're looking for and what they're noticing.
So then just walk through the 3 of them, just so that I just want to make sure that I always love having really clear vocabulary in everything we do.
Absolutely. So the first one, and there's no particular order, so it's just a matter if you're looking at all 3 of them like a graph. And the first one is duration. How long is that moment, that experience happening? Now, what I really love about this is that not only is it a way of looking at things from the perspective of being hijacked, how long were you in that anxious state or full of fear? But it also is a way to show people are moving forward. How long did it feel good? So I want to be able to say it's not just used primarily as from one direction. You get it from both sides.
Yeah, I see. So we're measuring how long something lasts, and that then we can decide, is it good or bad based on, are we trying to grow it or are we trying to shrink it?
Yes.
Gotcha.
So then obviously frequency is how often does it happen? If it's something you don't want to have happen, you want the frequency to be longer and in between. And if it's something that you're enjoying having, you get to offer also again, that frequency, is that happening more often? And of course, the follow-up question is, and how is that happening? What is it you are doing that is being able to make those 2 changes? Now, the last one is intensity. And we all know intensity. We're always, measuring intensity. Is how high did it go? How big was it? And intensity is the one that I always let people know is that may not change much. There are times, right? You get a response from somebody, an email, something happens in your life. Your intensity can still go up to a 10.
Right.
And so it's not so much the intensity per se, is that you've got, well, how long did it last? So now you're kind of using all 3 of them. When's the last time you had something that high? Oh boy, so frequency.
Right.
How much, how long did it last? Well, it only lasted 20 minutes. And again, how did you get that to happen?
Right.
What were you doing?
And so I think the thing that I love about this so much is, the only way we can tell if something is working, and the only way we can evaluate something is if it can be measured. Mm-hmm. Like that's the reason why when most people learn the basics of tapping, and you rate it from 0 to 10 on a Sun scale, and that's just a momentary way for me to measure to see what is going on. For this, because it's something that we're mapping over time, I think it becomes even more useful because it's so easy to get caught up in the sense of the new normal, that change has happened, and the intensity thing. I could be in a circumstance where I have a pain that is a 7 and we do some tapping and it goes down to a 4. And I wake up tomorrow when it's a 4 and I think that's great. And I wake up the next day and a 4, I think that's great. And I wake up on the 3rd day and my knee hurts and I'm really annoyed that my knee hurts. And I have forgotten that the intensity has actually changed over time. And so by being able to measure it specifically, I'm able to go, oh, it was worse before than it is now. I could see frequency as being the one that we need to point out a lot, because it happened in the past, it happened now, therefore it must still be happening. Where we don't recognize that distance when we're trying to make things less frequent, the distance that goes between them isn't something we're measuring. We just know it happened in the past and it happened now, and it gives us a chance to really name and know the change that's happening.
That's so true. And then there's a question that I like to ask too, which is that different? So putting it, the tool is meant for the client to create their internal structure, a way for them to conceptualize. So I know that, I worked with a client this morning, and as she was telling me, after a while, that vocabulary, the way you're talking about it, becomes so natural between us because it's co-constructed, is that then it becomes an internalized process for them. So as she's talking to me and she was telling me about something that happened, then all of a sudden she was going, but that's different. That's different than it was before. And that's the person who we want to be able to hold, right? That difference, that they can go through that process themselves and be able to measure it and then be able to go, and here's what I did. And that was really helpful for me. And it gives them that sense of safety and empowerment.
And that question, like just as a question in general in doing evaluation, I love that question. How is this different? Mm-hmm. Because it forces us to, because sometimes what happens is, like, as things are getting better, all of a sudden things feel better because we recognize how far we've traveled. And we didn't realize how much change is happening because we're only noticing the discomfort that's in front of us. And so our experience of the thing might not change, our intensity of the experience not change, but our interpretation of what that experience changes the way we feel about that thing. It's not perfect, but oh my gosh, it's so much better than it once was. I am on the right path.
Yeah. And that's when I take, because obviously this is a very cognitive, model, and it's one that you're kind of, it's the container of which you're having conversations. However, when I add it in it can be added into the tapping very easily too.
Right.
And the conversation is, how I think of it is, once you've got any kind of topic you're talking about it and get the intensity down and you're in a soft place, you're in a much more receptive place, is as opposed to saying, I know a lot of people use affirmations. Now I'm loving myself and I am capable and whatnot, is I think this is where I'll put well-placed questions that are the same thing. Like, I wonder what I'll notice that will be different. I wonder what's going to be the first thing I'll notice that will tell me something is different this time. And,
that's a very tricky question. And what I mean by that is you're doing two things in that. One is you're giving someone a tool for evaluation so they can really think about what change does. The second is you're priming them to notice change. And so it serves it serves a double purpose in that way, in giving us the ability to be thoughtful and deliberate about, because sometimes, we just know we want better, and we just want the thing that is bad to stop. And so by asking that question, how will I notice if this is different, gives us the space to start going, oh, this is what I want instead. And then as we're acting, then we start noticing these things. It's kind of like when, you think you're going to buy a certain type of car, all of a sudden it feels like they're everywhere, and they're not. You're just noticing them because you've brought it to the front of your consciousness of being aware of this thing, and it becomes useful information. And so if the consequences of change and transformation become something that is noticeable, then that's only a good thing, because it creates this sense of momentum of wanting to step into it more and more and more, because we're daily, regularly, whatever that frequency is, seeing it as possible because we're noticing it. Which means, when I am working out and I notice myself getting stronger, I'm more likely to go back to the gym because I can see the progress and I want to add to that. And in this transformation, it's no different.
Yeah, 100%. And what I love too is that, I love things that have multiple layers of what they do. It's like you were saying, is that on top of it, as the practitioner, I'm also holding that space and giving the trust and the faith that this will be different. I have no doubt that you will continue doing these things. I have no doubt that you will make those changes. And hence, it's coming across in the language. So when that is, and then, like you say, you're also having people start to notice what would be a small thing that would tell me that I'm moving in that direction, or that change has started to already happen. And what am I going to be saying about myself when that is the case?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot.
So there's so much seed planting, as I call it. It's just more
Absolutely.
sprinkling seeds all over the place.
Yeah.
For future conversation.
And then I guess, and then the other thing I could notice inside of this is, in the beginning, so we need to baseline in some way. So when we're trying to do transformation, we're going to be asking about the duration, the frequency, the intensity, and one or all three of those questions will apply depending on what we're talking about. I could see being in a situation where the first time we do this sort of thing, there's a huge emotional response, because since we are clearly naming and articulating the reality of the struggle, to immediately be disappointed in ourselves. Because, I've been tapping for so long, I can't believe this stuff's still going on. Where it becomes so easy for me to beat myself up, because it's like, oh, I have this problem. And that's one thing. It's another thing to drag the issue into the light of day and to categorize it and to catalog it. So now I see all of the details of it. And so I could see could be an important component of this is recognizing your emotional response. First, recognizing any resistance to wanting to actually categorize things and catalog things in this way. Then second, after you've done that initial categorization and cataloging, notice if there's any emotion about the fact that that's happened, and to give yourself permission to know that this isn't an exercise of beating myself up, but being able to tap on, I'm doing this as a tool to move forward so that this is constructive in a way that is helpful, so that when we come back the second time and do that, whenever that is, the next time we're talking to a practitioner, we're working on our own, then we have the space to recognize the change that's happened.
What's interesting is that I find, over many, many years of working with this, that even if somebody is, let's say, negative 20, just, for the sake of it and whatnot, because there's never any discussion about why it's so bad, it's always about where you're moving, is even if it moves up to a negative 10, there's still, there's
absolutely
movement in the direction you want to go, to which you get to build on. How did that happen? What's going to be different if it's a negative 10? How are you going to be out in the world with it?
Yeah.
So I find that it actually, there's, I would say, almost less of that being hard on, because the other side, and then I'll even go is, how did you keep it from being a negative 30?
Right.
There's the where you kind of go around the back door and it's go, okay, well,
I love that counterintuitive question where, like from 0 to 10, how strong is it? It's a 7. It's like, so why is it only a 7?
Yes.
And going in that other direction, that just kind of gets the people to think about it in a different way, because what they start naming immediately is all of the things that could be worse that are not happening, or they start naming all of the change that has happened already. Well, I did this, this, and this, and therefore it was much easier for me to do. It wasn't perfect, but the reason it was only this is because of the hard work I did leading up to it, and it's paying off. And it becomes this really useful thing in the way that we're able to navigate that as we create the transformation.
Yeah, so it's been a really useful tool, because it's a tool for clients to be able to, and what I really love is when you hear them talking about that with other people, right? When they've really internalized a program.
Yeah, the system becomes theirs. Yeah.
Yes, and they're talking to their kid and they're saying things like, well, how did you get that to happen, or is that different, or how did and whatnot, and it creates just an internal structure that may never have been developed as they were growing up, but now you're offering it, because I find people still need some kind of a thinking strategy. It just doesn't come because I no longer am charged about something.
Right.
Is that I need some new way of putting ideas about the world together, about myself and how I'm going to categorize them. So, at least being able to look at things from at least one tool through duration, intensity, and frequency.
Yeah.
Starts to give them a handle.
And I think that's really important, because, we are in a situation that we want to evaluate. That's how we stay safe. But there's a difference between having the desire to evaluate and having a tool set that effectively evaluates. And if we have a framework like this that gives us an effective tool to evaluate, once it becomes internalized, the system's going to use it over and over again because it's effective.
Yeah.
We're going to use the tool that is the most effective in the moment. And by offering it a new, more effective tool, it's more likely to be used repetitive in this sort of way.
Yeah. And it's got a simplicity. Let's face it. I mean, we've all learned forever, how to be able to think of how long something is and how big it is. And, it's got a simplicity that people already have a connection to. They don't have to go out and learn some deep process that they have to, come back to and whatnot. So it's very, very useful quickly.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for sharing it, Mary. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You can see why I love Mary so much. Simple, straightforward, direct, useful. This is something when you look at this idea of duration, intensity, and frequency, you can start using this right away. And so if you are tapping on your own and you're tracking something over the course of a number of weeks and a number of months as you're doing this tapping work, I would encourage you to just get a little tapping journal. Track the ideas that you are tapping on. And then as you look back at the last week, think, okay, how many times did this happen? That's the frequency piece. How big was it when it was showing up? How long did it last? So that when we see from week to week, we're still experiencing some of the same behaviors or same emotions. It gives us this way of documenting to see that progress is happening so that we get encouragement. And if progress isn't happening, it lets us know that we need to try something different. And maybe that try something different is realizing, okay, this is something that is so big that tapping might be useful with, but I'm just too close to it to get help. And I need to get help with a practitioner to be able to navigate that. So I would love to hear your thoughts on duration, intensity, and frequency. Drop me a note and let me know how this works for you. If you know someone in your life who could use this little framework, please pass it along. Even if they're not a tapper, I think this is a great framework to see any sort of transformation at all. If you haven't done so, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can get an Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, and a million other places. Just go to tappingpodcast.com to see all of the information on how you can subscribe to the show and get every single episode absolutely free of charge. The entire podcast archive is located at tappingpodcast.com. Over 425 episodes there, all of them absolutely free of charge. If you have a question or a comment, I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqanda.com. Or if you go to tappingqanda.com, just click on that contact link at the top. I would love to hear from you. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli or Tapping Q&A.